Okay, well, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this video here. So if you haven't met you, my name is Aaron, and I'm preaching pastor at Red Village Church, and we're glad that you're with us. And so today we're going to be continuing our study of the Old Testament book of Ruth. We're actually finishing off our study. So I'm going to be reading to you from chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. But as we work through this sermon here, we're actually covering all of chapter 4. So if you want to follow along with me, I'll read verses 13 through 17, and then we will work through this passage. This is what the passage says. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So in this time here, I want us to think through something that I think this passage is actually strongly communicating to us, which is something that I really didn't consider when I was a young kid, something I didn't consider in my teens, something I didn't even consider in my 20s or even into my 30s. But now that I'm in my 40s, over the hill, this is actually something I consider pretty often, which is one's legacy. So if you've been with us in our study of Ruth, you remember a couple weeks back in chapter 2, we talked a good amount about God's good providence. How through providence, God is caring for his people, often through very normal means, normal ways. He's providentially leading and guiding our life in the normal, which, as mentioned a few weeks back, I hope spurs us on to be faithful in our normal, everyday life, recognizing that our normal, everyday life matters, that God is using it, often in far bigger ways than we realize in the moment. Then last week in chapter 3, we talked a good amount about having integrity, a God-honoring reputation of integrity, which is something both Ruth and Boaz modeled so well for us in chapter 3. They both displayed great integrity of doing the right things the right way, of going through a process with patience, not skipping steps, showing great kindness through it all. Now today, as we think about legacy, what we're doing, we're just adding time to what we talked about the past few weeks. Time to faithfulness, faithfulness to God's good providence in our life. Time to having integrity, of doing the right things the right way, without skipping steps, with patience, showing kindness. Time to faithful integrity that can lead to a ripple effect that results in a God-honoring legacy, which is something I hope today we think about, no matter where you are in life as you watch this video, whether you're a teen, in your 20s, 30s, or someone like me who's over the hill. So for our final sermon or study of Ruth, what we're going to do is just work through the passage like we have been the last few weeks. I'm just going to be kind of walking through. There's a lot going on in our passage. Some of it's a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try to do my best to clarify any confusion that you have from this passage. And then we're going to close out this time and close out our study of Ruth by me organizing some thoughts for us concerning our legacy, and then just giving you one big takeaway that I think this book is pointing us to. Okay, so let's walk through the passage. And as we do that, let me just remind us where we left off last week at the end of chapter 3. So you may remember that Ruth proposed to Boaz in chapter 3 with the hopes that Boaz would redeem her and be like her kinsman redeemer. And at that proposal scene, Boaz said yes, like he agrees to be the redeemer of Naomi and Ruth. But he also let Ruth know that there was a kinsman redeemer who was nearer than him, who had first rights to marry Ruth before he did. So in our passage last week, Boaz in his integrity let Ruth know that there was a process that they had to go through. And he also let her know he was not going to delay in getting the process started. But then the next day he would seek to get everything settled so that Ruth would not be kept in the lurch of uncertainty. Okay, so that's where we left off last week. Now today's passage just details what happens on that next day. So if you want to look back with me at the text, verse 1, we read that Boaz, he went up to the gate and sat down there. And he didn't just go up to the city gate for no good reason, but at the city gate, that's where legal matters were often settled, where transactions would take place. Think of almost like a courthouse setting. So already, verse 1, this is Boaz going to the proper place. This is him continuing to do the correct steps that needed to be done. Right? More integrity on Boaz. As Boaz is sitting there, we see that the kinsman redeemer comes. So he didn't have to sit long, wait for the kinsman redeemer, or sit in vain. But we read in our passage that, behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken of to Ruth, behold, he comes by. Now, we don't know if his coming by was just like a normal thing that would happen. Kind of seems that way, like there's kind of a normal thing, people go by the city gates. Or perhaps maybe this was like more in lines with like chapter 2 of Ruth, where God like providentially was leading the kinsman redeemer, the near redeemer, to be there. The main point the author is communicating in this passage is that the near redeemer was there. And this matter was about to get settled. So we see that Boaz goes over to the kinsman redeemer and he talks with him. And he tells him, hey, turn aside, friend. Sit down next to me. We need to talk. Which we read that the man does. He sits down. And as the man is sitting down, we see that Boaz goes over and he gathers 10 men of the elders of the city. And he brings them over, asking them also to sit down, which they did. And he does this because these elders were going to be witnesses to the conversation that was about to take place. Once again, Boaz doing the right thing, the proper steps to get things squared away. More integrity, not skipping steps, doing the right thing. Verse 3, he starts to lay out why they were meeting. He goes to the Redeemer and says, hey, you remember Naomi who came back from the country of Moab? Yeah, just in case you didn't hear it, she's selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech, which you remember in chapter 1, Elimelech, this was Naomi's deceased husband. And so, verse 4, Redeemer, I thought you should know that this was happening. In the presence of the elders that are sitting here, if you decide to redeem this land, if you want to purchase it, I'm just telling you, you should go for it. I mean, you have rightful claim to this land, this property before anyone else, myself included. You're the closer redeemer, so if you want it, it's yours. However, if you don't want it, you just say the word, and I'm next in line, and I will gladly redeem it. In our text, as Boaz communicates this news, the kinsman redeemer, the nearer one, he's thrilled to hear this. So he decides to go in front of everyone and declares, yes, I will redeem the land. I will purchase it. Thank you, Boaz, for bringing this to my attention. Thank you for being honest with me. Where do I sign? I will take the land. Verse 5. Now Boaz goes to the Redeemer. Okay, that's in your rights. You can do that. But I should have mentioned to you that the day that you buy the field, just know that you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. Maybe you didn't know this, but Ruth, she's actually a widow of one of Elimelech's sons, Malone, one who died when they were in Moab. So you know this, near Redeemer, by legal rule, that if you purchase this land to be the Redeemer, you also are agreeing to redeem Ruth, to marry her and have children with her, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Meaning if the near Redeemer redeems Ruth and they had a son, legally that son would be Malone's son, Ruth's dead husband. And in our passage, as the near Redeemer hears this in verse 6, we see he changes his tone. Wait, come again? Oh, wait, Ruth? Actually, this is something I'm not going to be able to do. I can't do that. I can't redeem that for myself, because if that happens, that's just going to impair my own inheritance. So just a few thoughts, maybe just for some clarity here. So first, this just seems to allude that the reality that this man already had children of his own, and he maybe already had some plans in place and with his existing children, and so if he marries Ruth and they have kids, this would just complicate that. So just notice that's kind of happening there. Second, if he redeemed the land, and if it was just Naomi, he would actually have had no legal obligations to her. He could have just redeemed the land and left Naomi high and dry, like no cost to himself. And what we see in this passage, that's actually what he seemingly was going to do. He thought this land was going to be an easy money grab to him. But with Ruth on the scene, now there's financial obligations towards her and any heir left behind. So as Boaz tells the near Redeemer this news, what he does, he starts to add things up in his mental calculator. And the money is not working the way he wants. And so he decides he's going to bail, which culturally speaking, this would have been a very unhonorable thing to do. The honorable thing for him to do, the right thing for him to do, for this near Redeemer was actually to do that, to redeem. Verse 6, we kind of see that this near Redeemer, he's kind of like a sleazy salesman. And so he goes to Boaz, hey Boaz, I tell you what, you seem like a good guy, hardworking, you're pretty caring. And, I heard you have a thing for Ruth anyhow. And you know what? I'm going to give you this offer of a lifetime here. You take my right as a redeemer. I'm giving you that right in front of all the elders here. I just can't do this. I just couldn't sleep at night knowing how much you like Ruth. It just wouldn't be right. You redeem the land. I hate to stand in the way of a love story like you and Ruth. He's kind of sleazy here. And one of the reasons I think we know that he's sleazy is because the author doesn't even give his name. I think this communicates how much of an unhonorable character he is. He very much stands in contrast of Boaz, who no doubt is honorable. Verse 7, to make legal what was about to happen, we see that there was a custom in the former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging, which was a custom that didn't require paperwork to be signed, but we see in our text that to make this legal, one would take off one sandal and give it to another in front of witnesses. And that action attested to a transaction taking place. Verse 8 in our passage, we read the giving of the sandal. Verse 9, Boaz now affirms with the elders and all the people who were there of what took place. He affirms, what they just witnessed. Affirming that Boaz didn't just go out and redeem this land on his own, but he did the right things. He went through the process. He got the blessing from the nearer redeemer to legally purchase the field and redeem Naomi and all that belonged to Elimelech and to his deceased sons Shilon and Milion, which includes, marrying Ruth, the Moabite. Thus, in doing so, and marrying Ruth in front of the witnesses, Boaz agrees that he's going to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. He agrees that the name of the dead would not be counted as cut off among his brothers and from the gate of this native place. This is Boaz saying, elders, in front of everyone in this presence, you just witness what takes place. I am going to do all of my kinsman redeemer obligations. Verse 11, all the people, the elders, they affirmed, yes, that's indeed what took place. Yes, we are witnesses. This transaction is now, it's valid, it's final. Boaz is the redeemer. And as they confirmed what just took place, they go to Boaz, hey, we now want to pray for you. So we read a great prayer. The passage, they prayed, that may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who built up together the house of Israel. Now, if you're not familiar with Rachel and Leah, this is from the book of Genesis, where there's a man named Jacob who had his name changed to Israel after he wrestled with God. And he married two sisters, Rachel and Leah, who birthed children, including 12 sons who became the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel, which was a real sign of God's favor and blessing on them. Keep going in our text, we see that they prayed that God would bless and show favor to Ruth and Boaz, give them children. Verse 11, Boaz, may God give you the grace to act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. We pray that your house would be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, which, if you're not familiar with that story, this story is actually one of a real tragedy, also revolving a kinsman redeemer. So Tamar's husband was a wicked man, and he was struck down by God because of his wickedness. Then his brother Onan was to be the kinsman redeemer of Tamar. But we see in Genesis that he also was a wicked man, and he failed to properly fulfill his responsibility as the redeemer. He also was unhonorable. As all that was happening, Judah, the father, didn't seem to care about Tamar or what was happening. So they basically put her in a really awful place, which led Tamar to work out a plan where I guess you could say she tricks Judah, her father-in-law, into lying with her. And she became pregnant with a son named Perez to continue on the family line. In that story, just like the story of Leah and Rachel, there's actually a whole lot going on that we just don't have time to work through here. But for our purposes of our passage, this prayer of the people at the scene, what they're doing, they're praying that God might bless Boaz and Ruth with children, just like he did with Rachel, Leah, and Tamar. That they would have offspring to carry on the family line, and that their offspring would be one of great prominence. Going back again to Genesis and 12 tribes, Judah, Perez. At the end of Jacob's life in Genesis 49, he prayed over each of his sons. And as he comes to Judah, he prays this most incredible and important prayer, that from his line, from the line of Judah, which included Perez, that a king would come. The king's scepter would not depart from this king. That from the line of Judah, an eternal king would come of prominence, who, by the way, as followers of Jesus Christ, we know that he is the true Lion of the tribe of Judah, who is the true eternal King who is crucified and risen from the dead. So that's what they're praying. They're praying for great blessings of children to come from them. Verse 13, so Boaz takes Ruth. She becomes his wife. We read that he lays with her. They have intercourse. And the Lord answered the prayer of the people. And God gave Ruth conception. And she bore a son who would become the pride and joy, not just of Boaz and Ruth, but also of Naomi. And everyone could see how much of a pride and joy this child became to Naomi. Our text tells us that the women in the area, they said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel." So we talked about this a little bit last week. Naomi, when she returns to Bethlehem in bitterness, she declares that God brought her back empty. But now as the story ends, as we see a fuller picture of what God was doing in her life, we see that God brought her back to Bethlehem to fill her. That in his grace, God would fill her with a child to be her pride and joy. Right? This is an evidence of God's grace on this once bitter woman. Verse 15, the women to Naomi, he, this child, should be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. Naomi, this daughter-in-law who loves you, she is more to you than 7 sons. In short, Naomi, you are so full. You are so blessed beyond measure. God has filled you with incredible ways, starting with this amazing young woman named Ruth, who has given birth to this incredible son that you are holding. Verse 16. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave the child a name, Obed, which means servant, saying that a son was born to Naomi, which just further speaks of how much of delight and joy Naomi experienced with this child. It was like a son to her. From there, our text, the book of Ruth, ends, we see, with a genealogy that does speak towards the legacy of Ruth and Boaz. The end of verse 17, Obed was the father of Jesse, the father of David, which also communicates a fuller story of how God was at work in this book of Ruth. That didn't just stop with Obed, but it continued on past him. Then we see in verses 18 through 22, the author now backs up in the genealogy to tell even a fuller story of what is taking place here. How this story fit into a much grander and bigger story. The new genealogy starts with the aforementioned Perez. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Abimadab, Abimadab fathered Nishan, Nishan fathered Salom, Salom fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. And that's how the story ends, with this incredible lasting legacy left behind. Now, for the remainder of our time, first I do want to talk and think about legacy. And I want to do that just because I think that is something the author is really wanting us to see in our passage and in the story of Ruth. So truth be told, all of us are creating some kind of legacy right now. Either a legacy of faith, which Boaz and Ruth modeled so perfectly, or so helpfully for us, or we're leaving behind a legacy of faithfulness, or faithlessness, I should say, faithlessness, which I think the author wants us to see in the near Redeemer. So as we close, I want to give you some character traits on both sides of legacy, of both types of legacy. And then after that, as mentioned earlier, I just want to give you one big takeaway from the book of Ruth that I hope is a real encouragement to you. So first, just let's think about our legacy. As mentioned, you and I, we actually are creating a legacy, whether we think about it or not. Our actions, our attitudes, they matter. They're telling a story. In the passage, as mentioned, 2 legacies are left behind. So the first one we're going to talk about is the legacy of the near Redeemer, which is a legacy of faithlessness. And the second one was just look at Ruth and Boaz again and just think about what a legacy of faith that they have left for us. So a legacy of the near Redeemer. Now, we don't know how the rest of his life turned out. Perhaps God's grace may have actually redeemed him and changed the legacy that he was leaving behind to a legacy of faith. But we can see in our text, the legacy we have here, this actually is a warning to us. This is what faithlessness looks like, a faithless legacy. So let's just give me a few thoughts of what we can learn from his negative example. So first, those who only consider self, those are the ones who leave behind a faithless legacy. Right? That's all the guy can think about in this passage is himself. He doesn't care really about Ruth. He certainly doesn't care about Naomi. He has no care or concern how he might be able to help them, how he might be able to care for them. There's no concern on what the right, honorable thing for him to do was. What do we see in the passage? His legacy was all about him. No awareness or care towards anyone but self. Only willing to do things that brought about benefit to him. That's the warning that we are to see in this passage. A faithless legacy. Living a life where all we care about is like us. Number one. Unwilling to actually help others. Unwilling to do the right, honorable things. Unwilling to show kindness. Trying to get out of responsibilities that are set before us because they're just too hard. Which leads to the second thing. Those who leave behind a faithless legacy, they're just unwilling to do hard things. And I actually think this is one of the real struggles we have in society today. We really struggle to do hard things. When hard things come our way, we either wilt under the pressures of difficulty. We try to ghost the situations, backing away from it as fast as we can. Or we just simply feel sorry for ourselves, crippled by self-pity, where we carry on some type of victim mentality, where the victim is just so hard. Life is just too hard. So please feel sorry for me. It's just so hard for people to expect these things of me. It's just not fair. Back to our text, in certain areas, no doubt. This would have been a hard thing for the near Redeemer. No doubt. It would have added to his responsibilities in life, having to care for Naomi and Ruth. No doubt, this would have really changed his plans of what he already had in place. This would have been a curveball. And these hard things are just too much for him. He just had to get out of the situation as fast as he could. I am getting away from my responsibilities and the honorable role set before me as the kinsman redeemer. This is just too much for me. Boys, you do it instead. I don't care what's right and honorable. Too hard. Just give me the easy thing to do. That's a legacy of faithlessness, unwilling to do hard things. Third, those who have a faithless legacy, what we just see from the passage, they actually have a forgotten legacy. It just doesn't last. There's no impact for the cause of Christ. It's just a life that's wasted. To say it again, the near Redeemer, he's so forgotten that the author doesn't even communicate his name. This is a legacy of having no value. He's simply forgotten, did nothing for the cause of faith. Redville Church, so again, this is a warning for us. Right? This is a cautionary tale for us. I trust that we don't want this type of legacy for our life. I trust that we don't want to live a life that has no value, that leaves nothing behind. So we do need to hear this warning. We need to hear the warning of just trying to look out for number one. The warning of being consumed by self. The warning of being unwilling to help others, to care for others. The warning of being unwilling to do hard things, even if they're right and honorable. I trust that's not a legacy that we want to leave behind. Rather, I trust that for the glory of Jesus, we want to live a life that counts, that matters. A legacy of faith, which is what Ruth and Boaz leaves for us. So let me just give you some things concerning their legacy. And as we think about their legacy, we just have to acknowledge up front, this is unique. In Ruth and Boaz, their legacy, their family line, we see in the passage, includes David, the great king. We know that from David, from the line of David, came Jesus Christ. And so that's unique, right? That's unique to them. Our family line is not going to be as unique as theirs. That's not going to be our legacy. It's also unique that their legacy is included in the scriptures. So we know that's going to be not true of us. Our names are not going to be in the scriptures, and hopefully the Lamb's Book of Life, but not the scriptures. However, it doesn't mean that by grace that we can't also leave a godly legacy behind. A godly legacy that could have a great ripple effect for the cause of Christ for generations to come. So let me just point out a few things here that we should really be striving for as we seek to leave behind a God-honoring legacy of faith. So first, for those who have a God-honoring legacy of faith, they live a life that's filled with the pattern of just doing the right things the right way. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here just because we talked about this so much last week, But don't underestimate how God uses like our faithful little acts, how important like doing the right things, as little as they may seem, how important they are. Like, this is the example given to us by Ruth and Boaz over and over again. Just a pattern of doing the right things. That's their legacy. In our passage, right, Boaz, right, doing the right thing. He kept his word that he gave Ruth in chapter 3, that he was going to get things squared away right away. This commitment that he made her wasn't like an empty promise, an empty commitment. Yeah, Ruth, I will promise I'll do this, but then as life happens, he just doesn't do it. No, his legacy, he does the right thing. He does what he says he would do. He does so without delay. He does it over and over and over again. He goes to the proper place. He organized the meeting the proper way. He sits down with the near Redeemer. He gets the elders. He does all of the right things over and over and over again. That's his legacy. And if we want to have a God-honoring legacy, that has to be the habit, the pattern of our life, of being faithful to do the right things, even the little things, to do them over and over again, to be faithful at home or work or in your friendships or in your schooling or in your church life. Right? Be faithful to do the right things, even when they seem insignificant, or when no one's even noticing you're doing them. Being faithful to do the right things, even when you don't really want to, or when it'd be easier to not. To do the right things, to be faithful, even when there's a cost to self. Doing these things over and over and over again. That's how we leave a godly legacy. Second, tied to this, those who leave a godly legacy are faithful to where God has placed them. So, I mentioned this a few times in these videos. Like I'm becoming increasingly less and less of a fan of social media, and for most of us, I think like the overall negatives that come with social media, they actually far outweigh any positives that we get from social media. And one of the reasons why I just think social media just is not helpful for so many is as a way of like putting our thoughts and our time and energy in so many places where we're not. That we're so many other places that we actually neglect to be where God has placed us. So this summer I had a conversation with a friend, and he was asking for prayer for a family member who was like just consumed by like all these like endless debates on social media. These debates that never really bring about any kind of resolution. And as this family member was spending so much time, energy, and effort in all these places where she was not, what was happening is like her children at home were being greatly overlooked, and they were suffering because of it. Like that's actually a real trap we can fall into. We can be so consumed by things that we have like no influence on that we miss out on being faithful to the people that God has placed into our life. Ruth, she was faithful to where God has placed her, faithful to care for Naomi, showing hesed, loving kindness to a person in her life. She was faithful to go to the field, faithful to provide for her family. Boaz is faithful to where God has placed him, faithful to care for his employees in chapter 2, faithful in chapter 2, 3, and 4 to care for Ruth, faithful to be the near Redeemer that he was placed in front of him. Like, faithful to where God has placed them. And church, may that be true of us as well. That we just are faithful to where God has placed us. Now, I'm not advocating that we shouldn't care about things happening around the world that are maybe outside of our control. We should care about things. But what I'm advocating for is that rather than trying to fix all of the world's problems, just be faithful in the present. Faithful where God has placed you. Faithful to care for the people that God has placed in your life. Be faithful. Be present in like your marriage, or with your children, or with your friends, or with your coworkers, or with your neighbors, your job, your schooling. Be faithful where God has placed you. Be faithful to our church family. The people that God has placed in your life. If you really want to make a difference, if you want to leave a godly legacy behind, be faithful to those people. Be faithful to the needs that they have. Which, by the way, is that not like really at the heart of a calling to make disciples? Like, we can't disciple the whole world, but we can disciple the people that God has placed in our life. A godly legacy, a legacy that lasts, is being faithful to those who God has placed in your life. third thing I want to point out. Those who have a godly legacy are faithful to care about people. Right? They actually care about real people that they have influence on. They don't care about themselves. Right? They care about loving, serving, caring for others. Those who seek to have a godly legacy are faithful to be a blessing and encouragement to others, even at personal cost. Once again, is that not the legacy left behind by both Ruth and Boaz? A lot of sacrifice to show love and kindness towards others. All the care that they showed brought about great cost to them. That's what we're shooting for as a church. That we're really seeking to care for others, to consider others more important than self, to lay down our lives for the sake of others. That's what Christ commands us. And that's what Christ did for us. Right? He willingly laid down his life as a sacrifice for us to forgive us of our sin. He paid all of the great cost as he poured out his incredible love and kindness on his people of faith. Red Village, if you want to leave behind a God-honoring legacy, if you want to make a real difference for Jesus with your life, these ingredients I just mentioned, they must be faithfully present. Faithfully doing the right things, the right way, making good on commitments, doing it over a lifetime, being faithful where God has placed you, the people he's put in your life, being faithful to seek to care for them in real ways, even if it comes at a cost. When we do that, that's how we live a life that ripples far past our short time here on earth. When we are faithful, that bears fruit for all eternity. Can I just ask, as you look at your life, what kind of life are you leading? What kind of legacy are you creating right now? Is it one of faithfulness? Or is it simply one of faithlessness? A life that is wasted. Now, as I close out our sermon here and close out this sermon series, I want to give you just one real big takeaway from the book of Ruth. And I think this is where all this is leading to, which is simply we can trust in our God. We can trust in him. And we can trust that indeed he's at work in our life, even if we don't see it, even in the normal. We can trust that he is keeping his word to us, his promises to us. Really, that's what the genealogy is pointing us to. That God is faithful to his promises to his people. As mentioned, this genealogy ultimately leads us to Jesus Christ, the true Redeemer of our soul, who is the substitutionary sacrifice who died for our sins. Red Village, read Ruth and let this amazing little story here lead you to trust in God in all things. I've mentioned trust that, yes, he's at work in your life, even in the normal. Trust, indeed, he's at work in your life, maybe in ways that you don't even expect. And going back to one of the earlier sermons, like Ruth, she's a Moabite. No one would have expected her, culturally speaking, to be a great hero of the faith, but that's exactly what she is. And by the way, we talked about this in my small group this past week, but in Boaz's lines, you see there's a man named Salmon. And what we see in Matthew's gospel, that his wife was Rahab. She also is an incredibly unlikely character to be used by God. But you read the book of Joshua, that's exactly what God did. He used her in unique ways, unexpected ways. Trust that God is at work in unexpected ways in your life, even if you don't see it. That God is even at work, even in the slow burn that is 2020 and into 2021. Red Village, read the book of Ruth and trust God, trust in him, and live your life in community with others, showing real kindness to one another. Read Ruth, trust in God, and turn away from the bitterness that you're carrying in life. Bitterness is such an evil, nasty thing. It just robs us of all of our joy. Trust in God. Get rid of the bitterness, that control that bitterness is trying to hold on to. Read Ruth. Trust in your God and the providence that he has given to you, whether it's sweet providence or whether it's difficult providence. Trust that he's for you. He's not against his people of faith, but he is working providentially, even if you don't always understand it. Read Ruth, trust in God, and be a person of integrity. Be someone who's honorable. Read Ruth, trust in God, and be willing to make sacrifices for others. and care for others, to show kindness to others. Read Ruth. Trust in God that He is the one who is faithful. He is faithful to His people. He is faithful to His promises. In this passage here, He is faithful to Ruth and Boaz and created a legacy, as mentioned, that leads all the way to Jesus Christ. And if God, in His kindness, is faithful to send us Jesus to die for our sin, only to rise again from the dead, if He was faithful to that, we can trust that He will be faithful to all other things in life. Red Village Church, leave a legacy of trusting in God. May God bless you.